All right, thank you. Our next candidate is Eric Adams. Good evening.
Good evening. This is a challenging moment for New York, especially working people. But we've been here before. In fact, some of us never left. Growing up in Queens, I was a victim of police brutality, but instead of saying, woe is me, I said, why not me? I became a police officer and fought for reform inside. Then I became a legislator and the borough president. Every step of the way, I sought to make change based on the blue collar values of my working class single mother. I'm running for mayor for the city of New York to reduce crime, grow our economy, address racial inequality, affordability, and prosperous city for all. And I will unite our city by turning our pain into purpose. This moment must turn into a movement. Thank you.
I know, Mr. Adams, you want to get in on this conversation as well.
Yes, Errol, there's no one on this Zoom that has a greater depth of knowledge around public safety than I do. Because of that knowledge, I know gun buyback programs are not good programs because those are not the guns we are looking for. It's good to do cosmetically. I also know that having civilians carrying out car stops is extremely dangerous. That is one of the most dangerous jobs a police officer could do, to do a car stop. I also know that the prerequisite to prosperity is public safety. And I have been stating this for a while, and I'm happy after the Times Square shooting that the other candidates, for the most part, have joined me in dealing with this violence. We must fight violence with prevention and intervention. Prevention, those are the long-term programs that you're hearing about, and they're great, but we have to deal with intervention. We have gun violence now. And if we don't reinstitute a plainclothes unit, not an anti-crime version, but well-trained police officers to go after gang behavior, those gangs are driving the crime in the city, and stop the flow of guns to the city, we're going to lose more young people. 95% of those who are victims to gun violence are Black and brown. 95% of the shooters are Black and brown. We're talking about Black Lives Matter. We must deal with police misconduct, but we have to deal with this real pervasive handgun problem we have in this city.
Let me follow up with something. You have called for the recreation of what you just described, a specialized unit to intercept guns, but as you remember, the street crimes unit had that task in the 1990s. It was disbanded after the killing of Amadou Diallo. And more recently, last summer, Commissioner Shea disbanded the anti-crime unit because he said it wasn't adding much to public safety. You left the department over a decade ago. Are you suggesting that we go back to those old strategies?
Well, remember, when Diallo was shot, remember, I was heading 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. I was on Wheeler Avenue. No one on this stage can say that but me. I know Amadou Diallo's mother, and I know the Adna Louimas who endorsed me. Here's what I am saying. The reason we're having a problem with the street crime unit back then and the anti-crime unit now is because we had the wrong officers assigned, and many of them were turning off their cameras while carrying out their actions. So let's have proper supervision. Let's make sure you have the right officers assigned that understand communication, conflict resolution, and use our skill and intel to identify those known shooters with precision policing and identify those gang members that are creating the havoc in our cities.
Okay, thank you. Now that we're going to turn to Josefa and Brian to discuss COVID recovery and the economy, we'll start with Josefa.
All right, thanks, Errol. So on the topic of COVID recovery and the economy, the next mayor is going to inherit a city that's still reeling from the pandemic. We have hundreds of thousands of people who have lost their jobs. Many service and tourism jobs have yet to recover, and a lot of the office workers who have flocked to Midtown and downtown, present company included, are still working from home. Yet prior to the pandemic, many families were still struggling to make ends meet. So let's start with you, Mr. Adams. What's the most important policy you have to restart the economy, and how do you rebuild that economy with equity?
Well, and that's important. That's the problem we have had in this city for far too long, that the inequalities, and when we rebuild this economy, we must rebuild it with that lens. Keep in mind this, pre-COVID, we had 300,000 jobs that we could not fill. So we don't have an employment problem. We have a real skills problem. I'm going to fill that gap by having a universal application process to allow men and women throughout the city to fill out that application, partner with my business community to determine what jobs are needed, work with my workforce development using technology to identify how to bring up the skill levels that we desire. And then we have to grow the economy. We need to attract new businesses here. We should become the center of biotech, the center of life sciences, the center of technology. Lift up what Facebook is doing at Hudson Yard and what Google is doing in Chelsea. And then we need to lean into our small businesses. New York is too expensive, too bureaucratic, and too difficult to do business in because we have a siloed city.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yang. And Ms. Garcia, same question for you. How do you rebuild?
But I want you each to get specific and name briefly one specific regulation that you would undo or ease and why the public would still be protected. And Mr. Adams, I know you had your hand up for the last round and didn't get in, so we can start with you. Just be very specific and name a regulation you would change.
I thank you so much. And first of all, the recovery is going to be specifically due to public safety and inequalities. But the specific, we could take down the rules around signage in front of buildings and businesses. It is a ridiculous rule that should be removed, and we can give a 30-day plan for non-dangerous infractions, 2 weeks for those infractions that should be changed in 24 to 48 hours.
Thank you very much. Signage.
New Yorkers know that I've done things that might not be the traditional city politics route, but that I've had a positive impact right here in New York City over the last number of years.
Okay.
That's appalling.
My
keep claims for that Georgia race when Black women in Georgia.
Just wanted to sort of ask, because these are questions that have been in the news. Okay, thanks very much. Eric Adams, I see you wanted to jump in this conversation.
Well, I just think I heard Andrew say several times of the vote that was delivered in Georgia. That is disrespectful and appalling to Stacey Abrams and those Black women who organized on the ground. I just thought he needs to stop saying that. They won that fight.
Yeah.
And we need to give credit.
Go ahead, Mr. Yang.
I would give full credit to Stacey Abrams and the Black and brown organizers who've been doing work for years in Georgia. Asian Americans are 4.7% of the electorate in Georgia. These races were swung by 1%. I helped raise millions of dollars for those races. So full credit to Stacey and everyone else who's been doing the work for years. But it's okay for other people to contribute to their success.
Yeah, let's agree that. Let's agree that.
A lot of Black women have been there.
Mr. Adams, given how close the race was, let's agree that anybody who sent $1 or spent time making even one phone call helped contribute to the outcome there. Let me ask you this, Mr. Adams. You've been endorsed by the New York Post, which has a conservative editorial board. At one time, you were registered as a Republican, and you have promised to cut the size of city government. What do you say to Democratic primary voters who would be skeptical that those past and current affiliations mean that you're too conservative for New York?
Well, let's deal with each of the three pieces. Number one, many people are not aware, but President Obama was also endorsed by the Post, and he was one of the greatest presidents we've ever had. The Post clearly acknowledged in their endorsement that we disagree with Eric on many things. You can look at some of the editorial board responses, some of the articles by the columnists. They know that this time I bring the skills that are needed to bring our city forward. And second, I'm a Democrat. Two of my heroes in politics, both the Hillary Clinton and our senator, they were once with the GOP. I'm a Democrat. My grandmother was, my grandfather, my mother, my brother. I'm a Democrat, and I know Democratic values. And I've been fighting on behalf of Democrats for over 35 years, and I have the record that people know of what I do. And when I talk about cutting city government, it's saying that we are inefficient in this city, and the inefficiencies are creating the inequities and injustices. We're not cutting those things that we need to ensure that we finally end the inefficiencies in the city. Our budget increased by $20 billion over the last 8 years, and those inefficiencies continue. even post-COVID as well as pre-COVID.
Got it.
But Eric,
Okay.
Eric, you were a self-described conservative Republican when Rudy Giuliani was mayor, and you
Okay.
actually said that Rudy
Listen.
Giuliani, the father of stop and frisk, who terrorized black people,
Hold on.
literally
Miss
was
Wiley, Miss Wiley,
better
Miss Wiley,
than
Miss Wiley.
David Dinkins.
Ms. Wiley,
Better than
He's-
David Dinkins.
Miss-
on
Miss
solving
Wiley, let him
crime. David
finish. Go
Dinkins
ahead.
Actually,
Mr. Adams, you can
crime
answer
rates down.
briefly.
Maya, let's be accurate. We all have our own opinions, but we don't have our own facts. There's no.
Oh, Eric, this is a newspaper articles.
There's
This
no-
is facts.
If you believe newspaper articles, then you should believe what they
It
said.
was a quote. You were
And the mayor-
self-described
All
as a
right, all right,
conservative
all right, all right.
Republican.
I think.
I'm happy to
All right. Ooh, debate's back.
Welcome back to the first official Democratic primary debate in the race for mayor. I'm Spectrum News New York One political anchor Errol Lewis. It's time for the cross-examination round. That's when each candidate will get a chance to ask one question of one rival. Our order was selected at random. We begin with Diane Morales. You may ask a question.
Great. So I'd like to ask a question of Eric, actually. Eric, last week, I believe you referenced the defund the police movement, and you talked about it being driven by young, white, affluent people. What do you say to the Black organizers of all ages, many of whom I've had the privilege of organizing and working with on the ground, who have in fact been leading this movement for decades? What do you say to them about how your statement erases their work and removes them from having a voice in the movement?
Diane, it was the disband movement that I was speaking of, not the defund movement. It was the disband movement.
What's the disband movement?
That is the movement to disband police departments across the entire country. I am watching what's happening in Portland. I'm watching the anarchy that's taking place, and I saw the anarchy of those who came to this city burning police vehicles, burning stores, burning private homes. Those anarchists that are coming in various cities across America trying to disband police department. Policing has a role in the ecosystem of public safety. We need to define what that role is. It's the disband movement.
Okay. Next question comes from Eric Adams.
Yes, Andrew, I have talked about the shootings in Brownsville, Bedford-Stuyvesant, South Bronx, stood on the Bronx step house, courtroom steps to talk about this. And you did not, of my knowledge, respond to any of these shootings. There was no real conversation about the large number of Black and brown people who were the victims of gun violence. 95% of the victims are Black and brown. But there was a shooting blocks from your home, and you immediately held a press conference. Do you feel you should apologize to those Black and brown families that witnessed shootings in their communities and there was nothing that came from you?
As a parent and a New Yorker, it's painful when you see the tragedies unfolding in so many of our communities. And you're totally right, Eric, that Black and brown communities have borne the brunt of this surge in gun violence. Their parents will never see their kids again. It's heartbreaking. It's wrong. I'm with you that we have to do everything we can to help. And you and I are aligned on some of the things that we have to do to try and make our streets and communities safer.
Okay. Next question comes from Maya Wiley.
Well, let me just quickly say I'm proud to have an ethics plan to protect from the lobbyist revolving doors and to disclose everything that the public needs to know to trust government. But my question is to Eric Adams. Eric, 685,000 people, 85% Black, 88% innocent. That's what stop and frisk was at its height, that my former organization, the ACLU, proclaimed a racist practice and won a court case on. And just a year ago, you called it a great tool and have said that you used it. And I just want to know, because as a civil rights lawyer, all I can say is there was nothing okay about it. And it certainly was nothing more than lazy policing, certainly kept people's constitutional rights violated. How can New Yorkers trust you to protect us and to keep us safe from police misconduct?
You know, thank you so much, Maya. And every time you raise that question, it really just shows your failure of understanding law enforcement. So let me give you
Well, having chaired the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, I certainly understand misconduct.
And yes, you chaired it, and we both know that how much it was a failure under you. But
Getting Daniel Pantaleo
let him
off the
finish.
force
Let him
is
finish,
one I
please.
appreciate.
Let him answer.
I told everyone at the beginning of the race, once candidates start getting desperate, it's going to get really nasty, you know? So Maya, let me share this with you. Let me give you some facts. I was the leading voice against the abuse of stop and frisk. Everyone knows that. I was the leading voice. I testified in federal court. The federal judge used my testimony to make her decision. If you do a Google search, you will find from the mid-90s throughout my entire career, I talked about the abuse of stop and frisk. I partnered with Hakeem Jeffries, who's now the congressman, and introduced a bill in Albany that talked about, number one, the illegal use of quotas,
Okay.
and number two, keeping a database from stop and frisk. When you use stop and frisk,
Database,
Okay.
a database.
when you use stop and frisk, if someone is hiding in an alleyway, 4 o'clock in the morning, and the police officers stop him, question him on what he's doing there, that is a legal stop. That is how you're supposed to use
You and I both know that the reason that 88% of people were innocent who were stopped and frisked is because it wasn't actually about anybody who was doing anything wrong in the first place. In
Okay.
fact, the biggest excuse
Maya, tell me
was
something.
about the way people looked.
Maya,
I've seen the
Maya,
cases,
yeah,
I've
okay.
watched them. That's why we got
Maya,
down.
don't
Let
record
him
me.
respond, and then we're going to move on.
Maya, did you speak up on this issue at all? Is there any place I could?
Yes.
Maya,
Yes,
I don't
actually,
know
because
at
I've
all.
spent my whole life as a
Okay.
racial justice
That's
advocate,
not what I'm talking about.
including
Okay.
creating a criminal
Candidates,
justice initiative in
we-
post-apartheid South Africa.
I think we have aired this issue. We got a question, we got an answer, we got an exchange. Thank you.
Mayor. But I want to ask my question to Eric Adams.
Mhm.
And Eric, we've talked a lot about gun violence and the terrible destruction it's having in our city, particularly in Black and brown communities. And I do want to say, you have said that you would carry a gun as mayor repeatedly. And, you know, I've heard you say you would ask the police whether they thought there was a threat. But isn't this a question to ask the voters of New York? You know, leadership matters. And the mayor of New York is one of the most important positions in this country. And as a New Yorker, but also as a parent, I'm deeply concerned about the idea of a mayor who carries a gun at a time where gun violence is spiking and we're losing so many people in New York. So I really do want to hear you answer, not from the police side, but as mayor, how can you justify carrying a gun?
Well, Sean, thank you for that. And I believe you asked that question the other day and I answered it, but I will answer it again for you now. As a retired member of the New York City Police Department, I'm authorized to carry a gun 24 hours a day. And while I was retired, I never carried my gun. But while I was off duty, I have taken police actions many times to save the lives of people who are victims of serious crimes. And as I stated to you the other day when we spoke about this, I would carry it if the threat assessment unit in the police department stated, Eric, there's a credible threat to you. I'm also going to reduce the size of the mayor's detail. I think it is hypocritical to state that the city is safe, but we're walking around with 5 and 6 members of your detail. We could cut that down to 2 and put those officers to protect the public. And that is why I'm authorized to carry a gun. I don't carry it now. I have not carried it since I left the police department. But if there's a serious threat that I'm told by the threat assessment unit, I will carry that gun. And that is something that you know and I know I have been a leader on guns in this country, on reducing the number of guns on our street. I am a leader. And you know what? I have a record, Sean. You know why I have a record? Because many people have been absent on this issue. You know my record because I have a record.
Okay.
But
let's-
what about the
let's-
example it
Let's
sets
leave it
for New
there.
Yorkers?
Let's leave it.
for our
Let's
children?
Candidates, let's leave it right there. We're coming down the home stretch. We've got about 24 minutes left.
And I'll stop
Thank you
now. 'cause
very
I know my
much.
minute
And
is-
finally, one signature policy to reduce disparities in education. Mr. Adams, 60 seconds.
Thank you so much. And when you look at the most Democratic candidates that have endorsed me, I'm proud of the over 20 plus years of being a proud Democrat. I know that if you don't educate, you will incarcerate. 65% of Black and brown children don't meet proficiency every year. We have to return the joy of learning in schools. We must have universal testing for dyslexia. One study shows that 30% of the prison population, they are dyslexic. We must look at the fair student funding to not only look at inside the schools, but what are the conditions around the schools. And then we must ensure that our individual children, not only what they learn, but how they learn. And I'm going to focus on that.
To one final person, Mr. Adams, what would you do? Would you continue on the path of creating a citywide shelter network, or is there an alternative?
Well, first of all, homelessness is a moral failure by our city and our country. And I know what housing insecurity is about. You know, I tell all the time of carrying a garbage bag full of clothing to school every day as a child because my mother thought we were going to be thrown out of our home and she wanted us to have a change of clothing. We need to properly identify the 3 areas of homelessness: children and families, the largest increase in our shelters, single adults, and we're going to get an increasing number of single adults that are coming home from correctional facilities, and finally, those with mental health illnesses. I don't think we could wait 2 to 3 years to deal with it. We're going to deal with street homelessness immediately by investing in those supportive housing like Fountain House, an amazing initiative, 85% stability rate. That is where we need to be going. And then increase the FEPS voucher to keep people in their home in the first place and retrofit hotels, micro units, and other areas so we could deal with adults.
1 minute. We're almost out of time. I want to squeeze in a few more short lightning round type questions. Please keep your answers to yes or no or just a few words. So candidates, what is the first cultural event, whether it's Broadway or sports or otherwise, that you plan to attend when the city reopens?
Broadway.
Mr. Adams.
You know, everyone is talking about the big places, but you know what? The small places matter as well. Sister's Place off of downtown, off of Fulton Street.
Got it.